Today, part two of the ultimate Oilers team from the Connor McDavid era with the same old twist, a strict salary cap and certain roster limitation.
You are Locked On Oilers, your daily podcast on the Edmonton Oilers, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And welcome to this Tuesday edition of Locked On Oilers. I am your host, Nick Zararis. This upcoming October will be my fourth NHL season as a host on the Locked On Podcast Network. And I want to thank everyone that is making Locked On Oilers their first listen of the day. Locked On Oilers is a part of the Locked On Podcast Network, where we've got your team, the Edmonton Oilers, covered every day. And today's show is brought to you by our friends over at Monarch Money. Take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use code Locked On NHL at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year subscription. So today, part two of our Connor McDavid era roster building challenge. Yesterday's show, which if you didn't get a chance to check out, we did the forward group. Today, we're talking about the defense. So we are going to break down our show into our normal three segments. Our opener, we are going to talk about the mechanics of optimized defensive pairs, what we're looking to get skill-wise. Our second segment, we will talk about the top four I have assembled that is cap compliant, that does not feature anyone on an entry-level contract. And then in our final segment, we will tie a bow talking about the third pair I've assembled, which will have some very recognizable names for the everydayers, and just some overarching thoughts about some of the struggles the Oilers have had assembling a defensive core over the last number of seasons. So to start things out, and we talked about this quite a bit on yesterday's show as far as the ideal forward line composition, I think it's absolutely imperative anytime we're doing a roster building exercise that we explore the criteria and what we care about, because different people come from different schools of philosophy. Certain people look at hockey in a certain way, and that instrumentally determines how they feel about play styles, about skill sets, and how to apply them. And I make no bones about it. If you are an everyday listener of Locked On Oilers, you know I am a big proponent of underlying metrics, of scoring chances, of possession being strong indicators of how effective a line, a pair, or a team at large can be. And I think we lose some of that. Some of the conversation gets lost in trying to translate the hockey on TV to those underlying numbers into this type of philosophical conversation. So to start things out, I thought I would lay it out in philosophical terms, not numbers, not results. My ideal defensive pair in the NHL for 2025 is very straightforward. I want a puck mover and I want a puck retriever. In an ideal world, you have somebody who can do both, who can go get their own puck because they're such a good skater, who's big and physical enough to withstand forecheckers and absorb hits along the boards as they go back to get pucks, while still being adept at moving the puck. And for me, if I had the binary, if I could only have one, the mover, the retriever, I feel you are better off with the retriever. Now, I know that is a bit of a controversial opinion. I know there are a pocket of Florida Panthers fans who love to jump on the comments of these videos whenever we're talking about defense and crap on Evan Bouchard for not being that physical, saying, oh, Gus Forsling's better. I'm sorry. We're talking about two different things. I am talking about value. You are talking about production and counting stats, and there is nuance. What Gus Forsling does, he is the best in the world at. He is the best defensive defenseman in the world. He is an elite puck retriever. He is great at preventing zone entries to begin with. He's really good in the neutral zone. And defense at large, real quick as an aside, and it's what Florida does so well, frankly, defense is a team mentality. If your forwards are bought in, they're playing 200-foot back checking, they are active components of your breakouts. It's not just your defensemen launching pucks up the wall or up the middle, hoping they hit somebody in stride to counterattack going the other way. Quality team defense means that if you're a forward in the defensive zone, you are making yourself available for that first exit pass. You are putting yourself in a position to receive the puck cleanly and to make a play happen. Now, when we talk about it in terms of retrievers and movers, it's very straightforward. You know, the Pittsburgh Penguins won back-to-back Stanley Cups, and I know Chris Letang had the injury, had the blood clot scare in the one, and he wasn't a big part of, but Letang, Brian Dumoulin, ideal composition. Big, lumbering, block shots, neutral zone defense, absorbs pressure in the corners, gets the puck to the mover. To a lesser extent, what you saw from Ryan Lindgren with Adam Fox, especially 2 or 3 years ago when those two first got put together, Lindgren did a really nice job of absorbing pressures, of getting pucks to Fox and Fox breaking them out. You know, there are great players like Miro Heiskanen and Rasmus Dahlin who do both, frankly, who absorb pressure, who eat hits, but are physically imposing enough, strong enough to withstand that and still be adept at moving the puck. I think Charlie McAvoy is a good example of that. And in assembling my roster, I have tried to have one mover and one retriever on each pair. I think in an ideal world, the Oilers probably need one more mover. And I think that was one of the shortcomings in the Stanley Cup final against Florida. And I know they went in on the movers in rolling that lineup where you had Klingberg and Jake Wallman and Evan Bouchard, who all profile as puck-moving defensemen. I think the struggles of guys like Darnell Nurse, of guys like Brett Kulak, I think that was a problem in relation to their ability to move the puck particularly well. And look, I'm not saying there isn't a utility for Darnell Nurse or Brett Kulak on a Stanley Cup caliber team. I think there is. I think you saw it the year before where you get one goal to go the other way. The Oilers win the Stanley Cup. And I think that's perfectly reasonable to look at as proof of concept. Now, of course, this is a fantasy concept. We're building the ideal team. So we can specialize guys a little bit more. You know, we can assemble a third line, which is about speed and possession with guys like Ryan McLeod, Warren Fogle, and Connor Brown. Now, on their own, none of those guys is a particularly imposing or scary hockey player, but all three guys play a very skater-centric style where they can make plays happen because of their ability as skaters. And with that in mind, you have the opportunity here in assembling a defense to really kind of silo off responsibility. And I think that's something the Oilers, frankly, need to do a better job of when it comes to managing Darnell Nurse, when it comes to managing Brett Kulak. And look, for the first 3 rounds of the playoffs, the defense was working better than anybody could have possibly imagined without Mattias Ekholm. That Brett Kulak, Evan Bouchard pair was lights out. They were outscoring opponents 7-0 through the first 2 rounds of the playoffs at 5-on-5. Ultimately, Mattias Ekholm comes back off a long layoff from injury. He struggles in the Stanley Cup final, which has definitely been a point of concern we've discussed here on Locked On Oilers over the last few days. And to set up our next segment, I will let you know, yes, the guy I spent an entire episode about, Mattias Ekholm, last week, talking about how important he was in the Oilers going from playoff team to Stanley Cup contender, is a prominent component of this defense. We are going to take our first break of today's edition of Locked On Oilers. When we return, I am going to break down the top 4 of our defense, why we picked the guys we did, the price points they're at, and why this group would be so much fun to watch. Coming up next. Most people can't name all their financial accounts, what they're worth, or what's even in them, whether it's 401ks, properties, or investments. And if you don't have the full picture, you can leave money on the table. And that's where our friends at Monarch Money come in. It is an all-in-one personal finance tool that brings your entire financial life together in a clean, easy-to-use interface on your laptop or phone. Monarch does the heavy lifting for you. You can link all of your accounts in minutes, see clear data visualizations, get smart categorization of your spending, and feel in control of your money without ever opening up a spreadsheet. It's 2025. We all have so many subscriptions, whether it's Adobe, a streaming app, the gym, a Stitch Fix situation. There are so many different subscriptions. Monarch keep tracks of all of them, and you can cancel the ones you are not taking advantage of. Don't let financial opportunities slip through the cracks. Use code LOCKEDONNHL at monarchmoney.com in your browser for half off of your first year subscription. One more time, that's 50% off your first year subscription at monarchmoney.com with code LOCKEDONNHL. Hello, everyone, and thank you so much to everyone who is making Locked On Oilers their first listen of the day. Locked On Oilers is a part of the Locked On Podcast Network, where we've got your team covered every day. And this exercise was very fun. I'm just going to be frank with you. I personally find these types of exercises, these squad builders, these roster builder challenges, to be a really good test of what people think. And you hear me talk about this all the time. If you're an everydayer, you heard me say this a lot around the draft, around free agency. Those are the very rare opportunities you get a direct answer as to what a general manager thinks their team needs. If you go out and you sign a 30-goal scorer, that's telling everyone we need more offense. If you go out and sign a 6'3" defenseman who has 30 points but has really good underlying numbers, that tells people you need your defense better. And in assembling this defense, which I've made no bones about, I'm really focused on pucks movement and skater mobility. So it puts guys in a position where we are optimizing what they are good at. And part of this conversation that we'll get to, and I teased this on yesterday's show, is how I envision the overlap going with forwards. And we talk about this all the time. I think in today's NHL, if you are not overlapping your best defenseman with your best forward line, especially if you have an offensively inclined one, you are leaving offense on the table. And that is in direct contrast to how I've personally felt over the last handful of years, where I was always of the belief that if a forward line can drive offense without your best defenseman, you're better off splitting them up more often than not. And look, there's always going to be overlap. You can't always get exactly the same forwards and defense out together. It's just not feasible to do that all of the time. But I always felt that if you split up your best forward and your best defense, you would end up controlling more of the overall game. But the way NHL coaches look at it, and we have plenty of documented evidence of this, whether it's the Rangers with Fox and Panarin, the Avalanche with Makar and McKinnon, the Bruins, McAvoy and Pasternak, the Canucks, Quinn Hughes, Elias Pettersson, the Oilers do this in real life with Evan Bouchard and Connor McDavid. You have the opportunity to use it as a multiplier. You know, you think about like Star Power and Guitar Hero, where you can get ×8 as opposed to ×4. That's kind of the effect overlapping your best forward and best defenseman has, because we are in such an offense-centric era of the NHL where we are skewing so much towards speed and skating. You are missing out on offense if you don't overlap those two. So with that said, and you won't be surprised to hear, the first pair on this team is Mattias Ekholm and Evan Bouchard. We are using the 2023-2024 versions for both. Evan Bouchard coming in at a very nice $3.9 million. Mattias Ekholm coming in at $6.25 million. We are getting one of, if not the best defensive pairs in the entire NHL for under $10 million combined. Now, think about what the Canucks are paying for Quinn Hughes and Philip Roenick, what the Rangers are paying for Adam Fox and Vladislav Gavrikov, what the Bruins are paying for Charlie McAvoy and for Nikita Zadorov, what the Avalanche pay when they overlap Taves with Cale Makar, what the Stars do with Heiskanen and Harley when they're in end-of-game situations. And to get an elite first pair that has demonstrated track record of success the way this group does. I mean, I'm going to click on over to my notes here because I wrote it down. So over the last, we'll use the 23-24 playoffs because those are the versions of these guys we selected. In 407 minutes in 2024 playoffs, Ekholm and Bouchard outscored opponents 22-12. They had 61% of the expected goals. In the regular season, they outscored opponents 78-45 on 71% of the expected goals. That is material domination. That's not just, hey, they're having a nice, that is, we are kicking butt every single time we were out there. And yes, that has the benefit of overlapping with McDavid, with Zach Hyman, overlapping with Leon Draisaitl in end-of-game situations where you're in a 6-on-5 and you want to control the game. I've had to reframe my thinking about this, and I do think you should as well. It's not that you need your best player to have the best player to get more. It's that the guys are so good. They bring the best out of each other. And when you have that multiplier effect, when you can overlap them to get this dominant of game control, it makes the margin of error for the rest of your lineup bigger. So if McDavid and Bouchard Ekholm overlap for 16 of 25 minutes, 24 minutes in a given game, and they have 60 to 70% of the expected goals, they have a lot of game control. They are in the offensive zone, and you have that night after night after night, and we have a season's worth of data showing 71% of the expected goals. That's an awful lot of game control. These skill sets perfectly complement each other, Ekholm is in the corners. Ekholm is the one who breaks up plays at the blue line in transition. Bouchard is one of the best puck movers in the world. I think if he makes Team Canada, it will likely be as the Cale Makar facsimile to run a second power play, perhaps, maybe to even crack the lineup if they want to skew more towards offense. And Bouchard, make no mistakes about it, is one of the best offensive defensemen in the world. And frankly, in my opinion, one of the best overall defensemen in the world. And to get him at that 3.9 number, that restricted free agent contract, that makes this all the more appetizing. And real quick, that was one of the real points of contention in assembling this lineup was we had to be cap compliant. We could only use one entry level contract, and we had to pick a number, cap value based on the year we selected them from. So we could have done Bouchard's ELC, but ultimately getting Connor McDavid, who's a Hart Trophy caliber player, on an entry level deal is just too much value to pass up. And you got basically Norris level production for less than $4 million here. So that's an absolute steal. Now, our second pair in this group is from that first wave of Connor McDavid hockey from 2015 to 2020. We have Oscar Klefbom from 2016 to 2017. And then on his right, we have Adam Larsson at 2018 to 2019. Now, I know both of these guys kind of had fall offs, and Klefbom's not his fault. Injuries are the worst thing imaginable. Having to retire medically is as depressing as it gets. There was plenty of good hockey left on Klefbom, as we explored on an episode last week. Frankly, I think if Oscar Klefbom never gets hurt, maybe the Oilers don't give Darnell Nurse the long-term contract he's currently on, and the Oilers have a lot more financial flexibility. I think Adam Larsson in a slightly more reduced role, ditto Oscar Klefbom, who both were heavily used during that rough period where the Oilers were really trying to mishmash together a Stanley Cup contender around the early stages of McDavid and Draisaitl, where they make the playoffs in that 2016-17 season and then don't get back to the proper playoffs until the 56-game Canada division season. So they were very concerned with just throwing things at the problem, and turning Taylor Hall and Adam Larsson was a massive mistake. And look, I think Adam Larsson is a pretty solid NHL player. He's had a really nice career. But in this exercise, for what he costs, for what his underlying numbers show, and look, Klefbom and Larsson played a ton of hockey together in that 3-year period. They lost their minutes pretty decisively, 45% goal share between 2017 and 2019 when they played together. But I think in a slightly more reduced role, I think asking those guys to be a little bit more defense-centric, and my friend Alyssa, who works for Winnipeg Sports Talk, she made this comparison, and I want to give her credit for it. The way you think about defensive defensemen is treading water. Now, you can't tread water indefinitely out in the open ocean, but you can tread water for a while. And if you are in your own zone and the other team has the puck, that can be a problem. But if it's mostly perimeter shots, if it's just a lot of perimeter passing, okay, we can make that work. We can survive this. We can tread water for now. And that's the way I would deploy this pair, this Larsson and Klefbom pair. Now, I think Adam Larsson is probably a little bit too low end to be the number 4D on a Stanley Cup contender, which is a problem. But I did not think of another right-handed defenseman who really fit what I was looking for here. I liked what I saw from Ty Emberson in the limited role he did have this past year. Evolving Wild really likes Ty Emberson, thought he had a really good defensive impact season his first full year in Edmonton, but I don't have enough of a sample to work on there. I wanted to spend close to the cap, so I wasn't leaving money on the table. And I think Adam Larsson, in a specialized role, has reasonable puck moving skills and can withstand a bit of that pressure on the forecheck. And ditto for Oscar Klefbom, who I think is a little bit of both. I think more of a retriever, but has above average offensive ability, 25, 30 points. Wouldn't run the power play in this case, probably put a ding in his counting stats, but has the capacity to probably play a bit better than he did in a more specialized role. We are going to take our second and final break on today's edition of Locked On Oilers. When we come back, we will hit on that third defensive pair and have some overarching thoughts about this era of Oilers hockey on the back end. Thank you to everyone who is making Locked On Oilers their first listen of the day. Locked On Oilers is a part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And we are wrapping up our All Connor McDavid team on the defense. And look, Darnell Nurse is on this team. I picked the season where he had his career year. I think that 2021 season, that Canada Division season, Darnell Nurse is probably the best hockey he's going to play. At that price point of $5.6 million, I'm okay with it. If Darnell Nurse was making $5.6 million for what he is right now, I would be okay with it. The problem with Nurse, and it sucks we have to talk about it for every single player now because we all need to be salary cap experts because of the way hockey is, where the salary cap is so much lower than the other sports. Nurse at $5.5–6 million is passable. Nurse at $9.25 is not. And that is why it is so frustrating. That is why we beat the drum. That is why we talk about it over and over and over again. That's why he got a whole segment on an episode last week where we talked about the biggest contract mistakes and the biggest lessons from them. And the Oilers waited too long. You know, they put Nurse in a situation where he played his way into a really good counting stat year as he was coming up on unrestricted free agency and effectively put Ken Holland in a bind. So that's really where we're at there. But yes, Darnell Nurse on the left. And then on the right, we have very familiar face, someone who, again, in a specialized role, a little bit lower in the lineup, can do a lot, and that's Tyson Barrie. Now, you might say, well, Nick, you already have Bouchard. Do you really need Tyson Barrie? And the answer is no. You know, you could put Ty Emberson here. You could put Brett Kulak on his offside. You could put Chris Russell on his offside. But I think for this role, putting Tyson Barrie on a third pair where you're going to tell him all you got to do is move the puck, and Darnell Nurse needs to only worry about playing neutral zone defense and moving the puck. There's no, no. There's none of the rushes like he's a fullback in soccer trying to crash the net. Darnell Nurse in a specialized defense-first role, worrying about neutral zone play and breaking the puck into the direction of Barrie. All Barrie's got to worry about is skating and moving the puck. We are opting for mobility here. All 6 of these guys are pretty good to great skaters for their position. I think Tyson Barrie is a third-pair right-handed defenseman, the version of Tyson Barrie from a couple years ago. Pretty solid. Can give you real offensive impact. Now, I'm aware, and I know there will be comments that say this defense is too offense first. What are they going to do against teams like Florida? And look, they're going to have to eat it in the corners. They're going to get out-physicaled. I would rather take my chances with these types of guys breaking the puck out successfully and withstanding pressure in forechecks than hoping more physical, more lumbering type of defenseman can survive that forecheck and break the puck out. Because at least if you're going to take the punishment, if you're going to lose the puck battles, at least when you do finally get the puck, have the capacity to get it where it needs to go. And that's really one of the real flaws in Darnell Nurse's game. This is something that sticks in my mind about Jacob Trouba as well. Guys who are above average skaters for the position, who have puck skills, who are not bad offensive zone handlers of the puck, who think they're better than they are, who do more than they can, and they bite off more than they can chew. They are too aggressive when it comes to pinching or holding, and that puts them in these constant states of conflict. That puts these guys in positions where they are constantly making mistakes. That puts these guys in positions where they become lightning rods because they are so volatile, because they feel that if they're getting paid what they are, they need to be contributing, and they're not running power play ones on either team, so they need to look for offense wherever they can create it, and a lot of the time that's making bad pinches in the offensive zone. That is trying to amplify offense. And to close out the thoughts on the lineup itself before we talk about the big picture real quick, we are opting for mobility. We are opting for puck skills. The other problem, and this will set up the philosophy, the big picture, there weren't a lot of great candidates. You know, I spent a lot of time on Evolving Wild. I spent a lot of time on Natural Stat Trick, just sorting by some of the key metrics, trying to get a good understanding of possession, play driving, who the overlap was at forwards, and we'll get there in a second. But in an ideal world, we are overlapping Bouchard and Ekholm with McDavid and Draisaitl pretty evenly, and we are trying to control the game. I envision using that Adam Larsson, Oscar Klefbom pair a lot with that Ryan McLeod line and the fourth line, and ditto for this third pair. The third pair, I've always tried to split between the fourth line and the first line, make that first line, if they are good enough, and this line should be, Let them control the game and let the third pair defense really just amplify. Don't ask them to do too much. Ask them to do their job. So the big picture question here, and one of the real problems the Oilers are facing going forward, they're not great evaluators of defensemen. And look, defense is harder to evaluate than offense because it is a negative. There is no assigned statistical value for being good at defense. You have to grind the tape. You have to watch the tape. And what stands out on tape amongst defensive players is shot blocking, is transition denials. And those are a lot harder to log and keep track of than just goals and assists. It's a lot easier for people to evaluate what makes a good forward versus what makes a good defenseman. And I think that's part of why NHL teams can struggle at large to diagnose a whole position group, because it should not be this hard for the Oilers to get 6 functional defensemen. And look, I felt really good about the Oilers defense last year. I thought once they added Jake Wallman, they had a nice distribution. The fact they got the value they did out of John Klingberg, who frankly could have been a candidate for this right side alongside Tyson Barrie, or we could have done Jake Wallman on his offside, but I did want to keep strictly to the left to right principle. I think when you have the ability to move pucks, and that is so crucial in today's game for your defensemen, that as much as we like the big guys to block shots, there's a reason Josh Brown's not on this team. And look, I know that's a cherry-picked example of a glaringly deficient player who only can do one thing, and that's be big, which isn't necessarily even a skill as much as it is a trait. The Oilers are in a weird spot where you have Bouchard locked up for the next few years. Ekholm is on the last year of his deal. Wallman is on the last year of his deal. You have Darnell Nurse until the sun burns out. Brett Kulak is entering his mid-30s, and you don't know what Ty Emberson is. It is not a coincidence that 4 of the 6 guys we've picked have come from the period post-2020 where the Oilers have been a consistent playoff team. You know, there's not a lot of the guys like Andre Sekera who were here from 2015 to 2020 who were more of bolt-ons, and that's really the issue for the Oilers. They have tried to bolt good defensemen from other teams in here without getting that full-scale commitment. You know, we talked about that in the opening segment, the idea that good defense is a team effort. It is not just about having good defensemen. But that will do it for today's edition of Locked On Oilers. If you could be so kind, please subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. If you're on Apple or Spotify, please give the show a 5-star review. If you're watching over on YouTube, hit that subscribe button. The criteria for this episode will be down in the comments if you want to make your own version of the team. And if anyone does do the full team, I'll be more than glad to read them on the show later in the week. Tomorrow, we do the goalies. Be sure to check out Locked On NHL and Locked On NHL Game Night, where they are breaking down all 32 teams ahead of the 2025-2026 NHL season. I will talk to you guys tomorrow. Until then, let's go Oilers.